Awesome. We are going to be recording this to share out to folks. So welcome. This is our series launch of Inspiration on Demand, Creators in Conversation. It is our 25-year birthday here at NET, and yay. And I want to acknowledge that coming out of 2020 and holding steady, right, that pandemic wall we're all feeling the itch in 2021, we felt we needed a breath, a moment, to really speak or give ourselves a spark to get us through the day. And so we created Inspiration on Demand in partnership with our board of directors. We created this series to offer a gift of inspiration, either live with you all who are here with us today, or on demand to play back later on our YouTube channel or on a link through our website. So inspiration whenever you want it, however you want it. And we posed a question to our board: who are your mentors? Who are artists who you admire that maybe inform and activate your own ensemble practice? That was the question, that was the challenge we posed, and boy, do we have some incredible ideas and treats coming up for you in this series. So we'll be announcing the rest of the series and rolling out who our guests will be and which board member will be in conversation as we move along. So we will have our next one in March. So we're very excited to begin to archive our stories, lifting up legacy leaders in our field, such as Leslie here today with Godfrey, which we'll talk about very soon. So just some really quick access and logistical needs before we dig in. We are recording, like I said, for future viewing. So if you have to move off or step away, you can access it later. The chat is enabled, so feel free to send some love in the chat, pose some questions, engage with folks in the chat. But it is, it is a public space, so let's just be cognizant and respectful of what gets put in the chat. And if you need live transcription, we should have that being played, or you can go to the bottom banner of your Zoom below and press the live transcription button to access the text of what's being said today. Now, for the main event, let me give you a very condensed version of both these amazing artists' bios who you may not be familiar with. You may be very familiar, which is why you're here. So I'll start with my dear friend, Leslie Ishii. I've known Leslie for a long time. Director, actor, activist. Leslie is currently the artistic director of Perseverance Theater in Juneau, Alaska. Board president of the Consortium of Asian American Theater Artists and Theaters and Artists, CATA, and also core faculty member of Art Equity, which I know we're going to talk about today, but many other affiliations and awards. I could go on. Thank you, Leslie, for being here. Welcome. And NET's board member, Godfrey L. Simmons, Jr., who will be kicking off this conversation with Leslie. Godfrey is the new artistic director of HartBeat Ensemble, Hartford's Public Theater. Godfrey is the co-founder, of the Civic Ensemble, community-based theater company in Ithaca, New York. Again, director, actor, playwright, numerous productions, and a lifetime member of the Ensemble Studio Theater. Godfrey, it's so great to have you with us today. So please, you both introduce yourselves, say hellos, and Godfrey, this is your time. So I'm going to pass it over to you and Leslie.
Yikes. So yes, Godfrey Simmons, he, him, his, and I am wearing like a white t-shirt under a gray V-neck, and I've got glasses on. I have to wear glasses to look at the Zoom screen, and so I just wanted to name that. My head's kind of shaved. Anyway, I don't know. And I'm so excited to be here talking with Leslie. Hey, Leslie.
Hey, Godfrey. Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Ishii, the artistic, newish, still really, artistic director at Perseverance Theater, as Patricia mentioned. I go by pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm zooming in from Tlingit Ani of the Occoquan and Toccoquan peoples, also known as the sacred traditional lands here in Juneau, Douglas, Alaska. And I'm wearing a burgundy turtleneck and these silver earrings that kind of reflect the symbol of the shield of the uh, Akakwam peoples here in Tlingit Ani. And it was given to me by a Tlingit artist, these earrings. So I've always loved wearing them, and brings good energies. I'm also of Asian, Japanese American descent. And because I have COVID hair, my hair's gotten kind of long, dark hair. So, yeah. So, and then my background, I just have to say, my background is of the Mendenhall Glacier here in Juneau. We're surrounded by ice fields and mountains and water. So the lake froze over, and we were able to walk across to the glacier and get a beautiful look at that. So I think about Tlingit Ani, and I'm grateful for it. And I just have to say, Godfrey, I'm calling in the ancestors because if we're supposed to be inspiring, you're going to be inspiring. I need help. I need to call in my ancestors, make sure I'm inspiring folks, or bringing the wisdom that's needed for this moment.
Well, that's actually it's a great segue into kind of because I have to tell you that that's one of the reasons why I was just like, oh no, I want to talk to Leslie. And speaking about inspirations is actually because of where you begin your work, and feel like in many ways you're thinking about the ancestors, like for the people you were working with. And I'm going to go back to when we met. You and I met through I was working on my Fox Fellowship, and the amazing Amelia Cachipera
Yes.
was kind of like put us together, um, because I was dealing with the voice and um, actor training and kind of thinking about how that was looped into and to race and culture and white supremacy, and you just kind of like began to really break a lot of that down for me in a way, and I remember being struck by how much your work was directly tied to justice, and I was, you know, and that's not like what's the word? It's not rocket science, right? Like, any art you do is political, and we hear that and we know that. But I mean, you're the one who really kind of just made this direct connection for me in a way that was much deeper than just that topical thing, right? That way of like, oh yeah, it's political. You kind of went deep on it, and I'm wondering where that started. Like, did that start? Was that always something with you?
Well, there's a couple ways, maybe five different ways I could go on this. That's how my mind works. Oh, yeah, I got 10 thoughts going on. Which one? Um, oh, I feel like I want to turn the tables and interview you.
No, no, no.
No, because that was so profound getting to work with. Thank you for saying yes, and Amelia Cachapero. Yes, thank you
Yes.
for bringing us together, because I think I was on to some interesting discoveries at the time in training actors,
Yeah.
and developing as a director too. And the sessions I had with you just helped me really actually go, okay, I'm on the right track. Um, eh, I'll go this direction. So I came out of training at the American Conservatory Theater, where in my class I was the only Asian person, and there were two other Black actors. So often you're an only or one of few, right? And it, and I think you met me at a time when I was really just past an identity crisis, because I graduated having been very whitewashed. We're starting to break that up now. Speaking of the work with Art Equity, Patricia, going into training programs, but it was so very much predicated on Shakespeare's the expert. If you
Mm-hmm.
learn Shakespeare well, you're a better actor. If you speak a certain way, you're a better actor. The American dialect, standard dialect.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I remember asking, can I learn an Asian dialect? Because, I mean, look at me, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to play those roles, and I want to
Yeah.
play those roles, of course, um, respectfully. And they said, no, 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 learn the Irish dialect first. You need to learn RP first. So that is just to say all that forced, that's actually forced assimilation
Mhm.
that BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, have been forced into in so many ways for social control. When you really look at liberation theory and how to dismantle white supremacist culture, we need to look at all the ways that we're forcing conscious and unconscious people in our training, in our direction, and how we form ensemble to really socially control them. That's what white supremacist culture does. So I started to need to dismantle that within my own body. There's so
Mm.
many important books now. Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands. It talks about the somatic
Yeah.
impact, or and had Resmaa's worked with the author to come to mind, but the book The Body Keeps the Score. Our
Uh,
bodies, all of us, the body
yeah.
keeps the score. It's in there. So I started to think about, well, then one of the first things I did after graduating, I went to New York and was grateful to work on Broadway in Shogun the Musical by James Clavell. Um, and that's the whole title. He returned a bunch of programs, by the way, because it didn't have his name on the cover. It's like, well, what a waste of paper. Talk about climate and
Wow.
recycling. But anyway, um, so that was interesting because that was about a white person's perspective on the Japanese heritage people.
Yeah.
And so after that I went to back to LA to California because I realized I'm a West Coast kid. I'm from Seattle. So I began, the first thing I did was I began at East West Players Asian American Theater, which is now still the longest running professional theater of color in this country. And they hold that mantle dearly, knowing many went by the wayside along the way.
Mm.
So they honor and respect those before that were really came into being before them. Um, but I was asked by Noble McCarthy, the artistic director at that moment, "You've been trained, please teach." And I
Mm.
was like, oh, does she really know what I'm, you know? But I thought, okay, she's called me in. My mentor, now an elder, now an ancestor, has
Mm.
called me in. So I began to teach, and I just had to go off of what my own recovery was. And it began to look at Shakespeare. And it's like, oh, the iambic pentameter is an English form of poetry, and it's forcing us, and they even have the audacity to call it the heartbeat. When you are on indigenous ground, and gratefully, to the best of his knowledge and experience at that time, he really did interrogate his society,
Mhm.
but he did kind of appropriate the Celtic, the indigenous, and the people.
A little
Like when you
bit.
look at Midsummer and all that, but what I started to really break it down into the breath, and you might remember this part of it, to decolonize that rhythm.
Yeah.
Because when you're in iambic pentameter and taught how to do what is quote unquote correct way to do
Yeah.
Shakespeare, you fall into that rhythm, and it's like colonizing your
Mhm.
own breath, your essence. So we started to go deep with just what is your rhythm, what is your self determination.
Mm. Yeah.
And then I would breathe. I created an activity where I would breathe the class, or in this case, our sessions, breathe you back 7 generations.
Yeah. No, this I remember. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and I basically look at and support you, whether it's just imagined or real, because at some point, and for a person of African and Black descent, you may not know who all your ancestors are at a certain point because of being kidnapped, forced removal,
Yeah.
and brought into forced enslavement.
Hmm.
So not knowing your lineage is often part of the history. Many are beginning to figure out how to reclaim that, of course,
Mm.
and claim their lineage that they do know. But real or imagined, many of us who immigrated here don't know who those now ancestors are from the motherland. So, in the indigenous lands we come from. So basically, I started to just create, as challenging as it might be, an opportunity for folks to breathe back, real
Mm.
or imagined, allow our ancestors to work through us and bring forth any imagery, thoughts, feelings, sensations, a memory.
Yeah.
And that started, I think, to help the classes and help me to heal. So,
Mm.
yeah, so it occurred to me in training, and I talk about this now when art equity goes into training programs. We have to support our artists first to have self-determination.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was
No,
that
I mean,
kernel that started to grow. And oh,
yeah.
and if you remember, we did Fitzmaurice voice work.
Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
And very, yeah, very respectfully. Catherine and I have a very good relationship, but we also have a good debate. Catherine is
Really?
English and Irish.
Yeah.
We also grew up part of the time in India, which is part of that whole colonial
Yep.
part of going into the English being in India and the exploiting and all of that. So we have a really healthy debate about what the tremor does. The Fitzmaurice, just for some of you who don't know, the Fitzmaurice methodology of voice, she happened upon if you can get your body into a state, induce a tremor. Like when you're nervous and you shake a little, or some anxiety
Mhm.
hits and you shake a little, you can induce a tremor, be more in charge of it and induce it, and it begins to shake loose habitual tensions, which helps you to open up the body, resonate more, and free the voice. So I started to share with her that when a BIPOC person does that, or someone from a marginalized group, um, you're basically shaking loose how white supremacist culture and colonization has created the tensions that we are constantly having to try to fight against, to have our freedom, be liberated in our own bodies even.
Mm.
And she'd be like, "Oh, Leslie, you go so deep. Not everybody wants to go that deep." And I went,
What?
"The hell?" So we've had a healthy, and she's opened up too. I said, I'm
Yeah.
liberating my body with this, whether you know it or not, whether you
Right.
want to engage with that or not. I know that my body, you say the body is the temple. Well, I'm dismantling that temple because I've been forced assimilated into the tensions, and
Mm.
the body, the muscular, the tendons and muscles, the pattern of my breath is force assimilated to accommodate white supremacist culture and
Yeah.
colonization.
Yeah.
So when I shake that loose, I'm freeing myself to be actually my full self as this fourth generation Japanese American whose parents, grandparents, and great grandparents were incarcerated during World War II in
Mm.
camps throughout the US. That's
Yeah.
what I'm healing from, let alone the white supremacist culture and colonial colonization. That actually is why my people were mass incarcerated. We can't talk about that without, and Patricia has heard me talk about this, without talking about forced enslavement, without going further back to talk about colonization and the genocidal warfare that was
Right.
enacted upon people, indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
So it's deep, people. I said, Catherine, I'm going deep because what are we doing this for if we're not, right? People
Well,
want to
but
free their voice. We're freeing ourselves. Yeah. So
absolutely.
please, yeah, Godfrey.
Yeah, no, 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 no,
I'll
no, no. Because
let
what's
go.
great about that is that I'm going to connect that with the with ensemble because what
Mhm.
you're talking about is that you can't talk about this thing, but then you got to go here, and then you got to go here, and then you got to go back, then you got to keep going. But if you can talk about this, you got to deal with this, and I think that's exhausting for
Yeah,
people. And I think for white people, I think it's probably
yeah.
exhausting to kind of like have to, deal with that certainly. But
Mhm.
what I'm getting to is that this thinking about ensemble, right? And thinking
Mhm.
about kind of like how you build that. There's something interesting about the work that you've done that I think is really core to helping create ensemble. And what's interesting, you mentioned the work with art equity, and I know we put it in
Mhm.
the chat.
Yes.
But that's kind of like the second or and third way that I actually have like interacted with you and know you is through your work with art equity, having done art equity, and then
Right.
and so I it's what struck me about thinking about talking to you about this stuff was how much art equity is a kind of an ensemble, and that
Mm.
it's mission. I know there's an actual mission it's codified and everything like that. There's this kind of dismantling thing that's happening to create a better ensemble of like
Mhm.
the theaters in this or the artistic, arts organizations, and then by extension society. But you know what I mean? And I'm curious, is that something? I know you think it's all, you just said it's all connected, but I'm curious about um, where that ensemble thinking kind of is sitting with you as regards the art equity work and all
Yeah. Oh, wow. I could go again about 5 or 10 minutes.
that.
Um, I'm a connector too, so I like to connect things up. I'm like, oh, you know. Um,
Yeah, but feel
uh,
free to go on any direction from that. That's
oh,
just
great. Well, you spurred my imagination and my memory that when I first started working with Carmen, this is before Art Equity was formed. I learned about Carmen because I was doing my assistant directorship at OSF, Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
right.
And they were being invited. They had been doing diversity work for some time, but they were moving into a new kind of phase, going, whoa, wait a minute, we got to double down. And bless her, Freda Casillas, a dear colleague, who was really some of the most sort of push behind that because she was the employee that I think had been there some of the longest and Latinx and knew that community because she'd been living in it for many, many years. Knew the Asian community, the Latinx community, the indigenous community there, and was getting to know as they brought more of the Black community too. And so she was a very key leader. She no longer works there, but she's a very key leader there. And she said she created this. Some of you might know of their audience manifesto that got kind of lifted up in the field, and she was really the person behind making
Mm.
sure that occurred and was written. Um, so at that time, uh, they started to learn about Carmen's work in Los Angeles because Bill Rausch, being the newish at that time newish artistic director, knew of Carmen's work in the community with the I think it was called. Patricia, you might remember because you took that course, the interethnic.
Yes, leadership development and interethnic relations.
That's it. Thank you. Yes. And so Bill brought Carmen on because he knew of that process as well to do trainings at Organ Shakes. And I was getting to know her because of Bill. So I got a professional sort of grant scholarship from Center Theater Group where I met Patricia and to work with her. And
Mm.
basically that brought me into that whole realm. And so at Organ Shakes, we did the first in-house training and I basically was assisting her. And then we were debriefing, and I said, Carmen, do you usually have someone with you? If I weren't here, who's with you? She goes, oh, no, well, at my organization, I'll send people out or I do it. I go, so you lead alone? She goes, yeah, I do it. I can lead it. I know the curriculum. I created it, kind of thing. I go, Carmen, why do you do that? And now this is coming from my lived experience where I tried to do some of this work at ACT early on and I was attacked. I was full on attacked by the white students. So
Wow.
I learned at that time through some
Wow.
other peer work that never lead alone. Oh, you don't lead alone,
No.
So I said
No.
to her, I want to keep working with you. I'll figure it out. But I can make the space or afford it or whatever that is. I don't think you should lead alone. And look at what it does when there's a Black person and an Asian person together.
Right.
We started to talk about how it breaks up the Black-white binary.
Yes.
And then what if we can have Freda come along with us, or at least be in the room
Mhm.
as sort of a fellow employee. Make sure we kind of like planting the audience a little bit, but also not really, but calling in folks to really make sure the space is equitable, inclusive, because that's what we want to build, right? Ultimately. So how do we start to model that? And so she and I worked together. I don't take credit for that. I just felt my own pain of what if she gets attacked? Because I know what that's like. And so we started to build. So our teams now are we work not to roll without Indigenous ever.
Hmm.
We make sure that Carmen is supported as a Black facilitator, Black woman.
Hmm.
Patricia's been on those teams now as well. You've
Hmm.
seen us, and Godfrey, you're in the alumni,
Yep.
community now with us,
Hmm.
and so you've seen it modeled that we always have Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, Black, and we always have a white accomplice, if you will.
Yeah.
Allies getting a little overused. It's taken the real work out of it, but
Yeah.
Michael Robertson has been, and he works tirelessly at being and understanding what it means to be a white accomplice and be active that way. Yeah, in thoughtful ways, strategic ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like creation of ensemble in the facilitation team.
Yes.
And we share power, we share leadership in the creation of how we roll out, and even in the moment to moment in a training. Yeah.
And I think that there's something, and we've had these conversations, some of these conversations with Net at some of our board meetings and our board jam sessions. But that it's that a feeling that this ensemble ethos is going to actually be the way forward. I think because the house of cards is kind of falling, right? We put so much money into buildings and not people.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically about theater, right? I don't know if it's the same. I'm assuming it's the same in the art world, and I'm assuming it's the same for opera and dance. But I certainly know in terms of theater, we put the money into buildings instead of people, so I think that this ensemble ethos, and we have proof because I think because the work that Art Equity is doing and partnering with organizations, I think has helped really kind of move the ball on a lot of things. Whether it's We See White American Theater or whether it's like any of the other kind of like movements that have started to kind of fire off because of this. I think Art Equity's got a kind of a leading role in that. I'm curious about how this is going for you in Alaska with this gig, right? Like, because I actually haven't gotten a chance to talk to you yet about that. Actually, just like how it's going, what's happening there. As much as you can kind of talk about it, like, what's going on?
Oh, thank you for that opening, Godfrey, and congratulations on your position. Oh my gosh, we'll connect after this because I think we need our own affinity spaces.
Yes.
Yeah, and welcome others too.
Yes,
Yes.
indeed.
I was a freelance artist for many, many years, and but Patricia knows this. I wasn't very upwardly mobile. I've never been. I'm an artist. I do my thing, and I'm in community.
Hmm.
I'm an activist, so I'm over here protesting and orchestrating direct action at the border, or now with detention centers with Suda for Solidarity, to close those and get real resettlement support for folks and recovery support for recovery for folks. So I guess I don't know. I was busy. I wasn't thinking do this to get to. But when I was invited to apply, I thought, oh, maybe I'm being called to service.
I like that little breath. I know
Yeah.
that feeling.
Am I being called to service? Because if I'm called to service, I will serve. That's how I was raised.
Mm,
So I'm like, am I being called to service? Oh, and I've been a guest artist back and forth with Perseverance Theaters. So they weren't, I wasn't unfamiliar with them and them with me.
yeah.
But so I just want to share this. In the process, I said, well, I need to talk with someone. What are your needs? What's happening before I apply? This is for interim. And they were talking a little bit about their challenges. Like many theaters, they were having financial struggle and nearly had to close their doors. So it was just time for change.
Mm,
And I said, well, I won't apply unless you have a really inclusive candidate list.
mm,
Women, BIPOC folks, and
mhm,
local people there. Bringing in
mhm,
people from outside in a very state that's got a lot of remote and rural areas. You have to honor who's there and who's been supporting this theater for it's now 42 years old. So they claim they did, and I didn't get to see the candidacy list, but they did tell me they had like 30 some candidates.
it's great.
Okay. So I applied, went through the process, but I was really clear.
Mm.
I lead with social justice, and you're a
Mm.
red state. I'm just saying, really,
Yeah.
I'm all about equity, racial equity, inclusion. I did
Mm-hmm.
my research.
Mm.
30% of your state population are BIPOC folks. 20% of that, nearly 20%, is Alaska Native.
Mm.
And
Mm.
being Japanese heritage, I know when I get there, I meet and always bring a gift to the elders, the
Mm-hmm.
leaders.
Mm.
I know what my community's protocols, I want to honor theirs. And
Mm.
so I will be building a relationship with Alaska Natives.
Yeah.
In case that rubs anybody the wrong way and they don't want a leader that will, you know, deepen that community building. And then there's a large Filipino community up here, and Asian community, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean too, because of the canneries, the history. I remember growing up in Seattle, folks saying, "Oh, what are you doing for your summer job? What are you doing this summer?" And so many of the college folks said, "Oh, I'm going to Alaska," and we knew that meant they got a summer job in the canneries or in the fishing industry.
Yeah.
So, so there's a very broad community up here, and also there's a Black community up here. We have a new initiative that we started during COVID called the Black Alaskan Arts Matters Initiative, and it's Black led. We
Mm.
uh, got to know that most people we were protesting. I was out protesting, but then a lot of people were making a statement. We instead made relationships. So we built relationships, and it's a Black led initiative. Now we're doing Black Alaskan History Matters and putting
Wow.
posts there. And with a little bit of grant money, we've been able to pay those Black artists to
Mm.
begin to bring forth their art and their history. And they've never had it archived. So that's part of what's happening. And it's Black led. We provide the platform and support, but it's Black led so they can build their network the way they need to and community build for themselves
Mm.
because it's so spread out here. I mean, Alaska at the largest stretch is like going from Washington all the way down to the end of the California border to Mexico. It's that much of a landmass at its you know longest or
Wow.
largest stretch. So we're very spread out, and there's actually less than 1 million people here uh,
Mm.
throughout, and many in Alaska villages in rural and remote areas.
Mm.
So it's an interesting state, being the professional theater of the state. Which there's a lot of theaters and arts organizations that are quite professional. It's not. Yeah, so that definition is kind of interesting. But so to speak about ensemble building, we've done some very basic foundational, identity and social location work with the staff. It's a small but mighty staff.
Mm.
We had to lay off, but we were able to bring back folks because of the PPP. But I started to basically do just that foundational work, and then we're starting to break down and have more shared power, shared leadership. So we started
Mm.
a discussion about where our organization is towards moving towards being a social justice, multiracial or multicultural organization,
Mm-hmm.
and decolonizing our spaces. What does that
Mm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm with a managing director. We're co-leading, but
Mm-hmm.
I said, and they said, "What season are you going to do?" I go, "What do you mean? What am I going to do? What are we doing?" I
Right.
said, you all do the work too. Don't you think you need to say in that? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to throw this up and you got to make meaning of it, raise the funds for it, and
Right.
then build it. And then, so we actually created a very horizontal system of how we replays and we're in small groups, have discussion, and we come back together as a full staff. And we chose the season. This is pre
Mm.
COVID. And
That's great.
everyone was so excited about it from all their vantage points.
That is
And
great.
even the company manager, I said, "What about how it's timed? Do we need to move the slot of that season, like production here, and then we have this much time, and then we go here?" And production and company management weighed in. Company manager at that time cried. She said, "Nobody ever asked me that. And I'm
Mm.
always struggling because we only have so much resource. And if we overlap the cast to rehearse, I can't make my budget, and then people get mad at me, and then just kind of the whole fallout of it. And I
Mm.
don't have enough housing, and I'm like, what? No one asked you? So I said, well, what should we do? And production loved it because then they had a little breather in between,
Mm-hmm.
and then they could build or bring in the next set or whatever all their process what was needed, right? So we and one of the major issues here about them going under was people were just getting burnt out. So
Mm,
we now work 5 days. We don't work six.
yeah.
Families for parents and families,
Yeah.
and we just have to make it livable. I'm all about we're not just going to live with people. We're going to live well.
Yeah.
Process to get there. But now we have task force. But this brings me to advocacy.
Hmm.
Noting your privilege and where can you be an advocate because you have privilege where others don't.
Yeah.
And so they form these task force based on change could occur. And there was some pushback, like, I don't know, the board, they approve policies. I go, oh, well, then we'll just present in front of the board
Yeah.
and we'll let them know our case and then see what they say. And together, we
Mm,
change that policy to make it living well, not living with, but living well.
yeah.
Because what are we doing here if everyone wants to leave because they're too burnt to do the work? I mean, so that's to me, that's ensemble building too.
Hmm.
And I'll just share it briefly. I learned about advocacy because Godfrey, I'm Japanese American.
Yeah.
I have people in my family, great grandparents, grandparents, parents who were
Yeah.
incarcerated.
Hmm.
And some of my family didn't survive the camps. They died there. And I'll let you know now if you didn't know, the camp system was built on the Indian reservation system. Talk about layers of oppression, right?
Yeah.
Connecting it all up.
Yeah.
So when we have our pilgrimages, we work with indigenous at each of these sites
Hmm.
to have healing and
Mm,
to honor the sacred, and many of them on their sacred burial grounds.
mm,
So this is all a part of my own decolonizing with my people and in connection with indigenous peoples.
mm,
So I bring that learning, and I'm not perfect, and I have so much more to learn
mm,
where I am currently with these, like the Akaquan and the Takaquan peoples, their
mhm.
history, you know. So I learned very early on that we have to advocate for our own healing and to have our way of life reclaim, revitalize our own traditions. I don't speak Japanese because it was forbidden in the camps.
Wow.
And many of us have that forced assimilated, even being ostracized at school for having an accent or, being new and maybe
Mm,
a newer immigrant or refugee and not speaking English. So there's so many ways we've been injured around language. So language revitalization is happening in many of the BIPOC communities, especially indigenous,
yeah.
um, here in Alaska and throughout the US and actually globally. But I also want to say that I learned about advocacy because I, as a young adult, was taken into the courtrooms when the Sansei generation, the younger generation, right after
Yeah,
the
you told me about this. Yes, I
incar-
remember this. Yeah.
incarcerated generation, they became lawyers and they were fighting for redress and reparations. So I heard people from my community in Seattle get up and testify. My grandmother also included in that group, other relatives and community members. And I watched the Sansei lawyers advocate for our redress and reparations. And it passed. Now, it was probably hush hush money, but still, that was a milestone. That was a milestone to say you can advocate, get a law, a bill, policy created. And now there's a line item now where they give us monies, grant monies, so that we can keep the education going
Right.
around, what happened during World War II. Now we need to do better about being anti-racist, you know. But that advocacy has taught me how to advocate for others and myself around justice. And
Hmm.
now the Japanese community is collecting hundreds, we're getting closer to thousands of testimonies to advocate for HR 40, which is redress and reparations for the Black community,
Mm,
and to close the camps because those detention camps, those are concentration camps. When
yeah.
you really look at how they're run, any kind of detention like that, that's so brutal, right? So that's why I also teach first self-determination in the voice work and how we bring our art work forward, our creation forward, because self-determination, how are you advocating and healing yourself so you can continue to advocate for others as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to jump in here too to just say, we do have a couple questions, and I want to make space for folks if they want to participate and ask Godfrey or Leslie anything. But first, I just want to thank you for those beautiful lessons, because I feel like this idea of living well, self-advocacy, self-determination, these are kind of fundamentals that I know, Leslie, you definitely model as your own leadership. And I think folks are really excited by what you're talking about with perseverance. And I know, Godfrey, what your hopes are for HartBeat as well. And so I think we would just love to hear like what's next for you all. I know, Allison, I hope I'm representing your question, and you please speak yourself into space if you want to say further. But what comes next for both of you?
For you, I want to put you on the spot because I've been talking, so maybe you want to go first, or
No, well, I mean, what comes next is some of the same things. When everything happened after COVID and then into everything with Brianna, and and George Floyd and all of that. There was a lot of kind of like, oh, statements. You got to say something. We had to do. It was all this stuff, and at first there was that feeling like, we got to do something. And then I was just like, well, why don't we just do something? Like, do the thing and make the things and be the thing that we need to, and say we're doing something, right? And I think, but and what was challenging was to really, for me personally, to have faith in just the idea that I was going to help facilitate doing the thing, right? Although I was running, would have been like a white-led institution in many ways, not completely. It was founded by three people, and one of them was BIPOC. But that, like, it had kind of become that, right? And so there was some challenges there in terms of how to move forward. And we're about to kind of like announce like a new group of ensemble members that are mostly BIPOC, which is really amazing. And so we're going to be, definitely moving in that direction. All of our programming this past fall it was, I mean, the generative artists were, and we did a lot of digital programming, probably too much. This was probably wait a little bit like,
it was a way to go, yeah.
oh, did we really need to do that much? But it was great. And by all accounts, it went pretty well in terms of the artists, in terms of how they felt about it. But and in some ways it was kind of an accident, but in some ways it was like 90% women, 90% BIPOC, which is like, okay, that's how you draw that up. Okay. And just now we're in a spot of having to really think about what's next. Now we're kind of like, we push some stuff out, and now it's time to kind of just think about what are we doing next and why, and what does it mean in this new time, and how are we going to go about doing it. So this spring, we have a thing dropping today called Be Trapped Inside the Window, which is like this great new play by Saviana Stanescu. And and so we're dropping that, and then after that we're just trying to hunker down and figure out what we're doing. I mean, it's not exactly retrenching. I Here's the thing, and Leslie, you kind of hinted at this. I've been doing this for 30 years. So in terms of being in the business over 30 years, I'm totally, the white supremacy is just like in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been like punching through against that for the whole time. But I think there are ways in which I probably haven't been punching at it and trying to dismantle it. And I'm working on it, right? Like I'm working on all that stuff. Just really kind of like just self kind of going like, wait, and having to check in with all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
what's next for me, and then for HartBeat.
Yeah, it's a constant punching at it,
right?
for sure. I was just talking with my managing director about our ticketing system.
Yeah.
We've gotten so used to the computerized. It used to be someone at a phone and then or at a desk and you came and you got your ticket. It was so real, so about the people. And I said, we're centering our efforts around the machine. And the machine is, if you look at the binary zeros and ones of how those computer programming, I
Yeah.
go, and that is built within a white supremacist paradigm. So
Yeah.
when something snafus, we all go, "Oh, the machine, the machine." I go, "What about the people that are trying to get into the show? Just call me. I'll pick up the phone and say, "Oh, sorry, you didn't get your link. Let me see what I can do," and just have that personal service again. I go, I know it feels like it's laborious, but we got to get back to the people. We constantly have to remind ourselves the people.
Yeah.
We're of service to the people. We're a nonprofit. Our mandate is public good. What are
Yeah.
we doing to be of service? So it's just interesting, all the little ways of how we get transactional just so seamlessly for efficiency. Or the computers are remarkable. It's an incredible genius sort of mechanism that's changed our lives more than any invention. But it's
Mm.
easy to center the mechanism and not the people, you know. So I
Yeah.
just that's part of decolonizing. How do we get back to relational?
Yes.
Back
Yes.
to relational.
I
Back
think
to
that,
relational.
yes, that's a really
Yeah.
great way to put it. Because it's
Indigenizing.
like, how do we get back to people? Like,
How
Yeah.
do we?
Right?
I
And
mean,
speaking of people, we have some folks here. I know most
Yes, I
people are
see
off
people talking.
camera, but if you want to speak yourself into space or put something in the chat, I mean, I'm happy.
How do we
We've
get
got
back to
Godfrey
relational?
Leslie here.
How do we center people? Well, how do we get back to relational? My first show, and I directed it, and I knew I was going to, before I was going to be artistic director, fall of 2019, Vera Starbard is our Mellon playwright in resident, who is Denina and Plinkett. So she said, when we produce this, when we open, Leslie, and beautifully so, Sea Alaska Heritage Institute commissioned the props to be handcrafted by Alaska Native artists, Tlingit artists. So she said, in our way of life, we would dance those in because they come to life when they
mm,
come onto the stage, and they're really a live being after that. I said, "Oh, well, we got to dance those in. What kind of opening ceremony do you need?" She said, "Well, it might take about an hour." I said, "Okay." She goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah, why not?" She goes, "The last people didn't think that was okay." I go, "Well, these people do. We do. Our team does, don't we?" And I looked around and maybe I was putting some pressure on people, but they're like, "Why? Well, how can we do this?" So I said, "Look, we have enough time. We'll notify people. Come early for the ceremony. It's
there
really
you go.
special. It's important. We need you there as the audience to witness and be a part." And they
Mhm.
came, and so they took the time they needed,
Yeah.
and then we learned how to care for those handcrafted props, you
Yeah.
know. And then
Yeah.
we danced in again. They danced in again when we took the show up to Anchorage.
There to go.
And
That,
special care taking they hand carried those props on the airplane, you know.
mm,
So we've learned a lot about indigenous way of life. I'll say one more thing. How do you get back to relational? I learned from a woman who learned the sistema, Dudamels. She's a musician. She learned Dudamel, out of LA, the conductor there at the Los Angeles Symphony. She learned Dudamels from Venezuela, his community building way of teaching music. And she lives up here. She was in the first cohort that went to Venezuela with him to learn this. So we had the most beautiful talk about community building, liberation,
mm,
anti-racism, and she's like a white accomplice in my community here.
mm.
So we talked about just the values of the indigenous here on Tlingit Ani. And she said, in the schools now for Music Matters, she's got Juno Music Matters, that's her org. We went to the Southeast Alaska Natives and asked, what are your values? We want to post them in every school. And I went, they're in every school? Then we should have them. We should be abiding by those values. And people, those values are beautiful. They're like respect for elders,
Yeah.
stewardship of the land, care when you speak, listening respectfully, all the things we want to do to be good humans.
Yeah.
And so we now go by those values. And when we open our staff meetings, or I open a rehearsal with land acknowledgement, we honor those values and bring them forth into the space. and that helps us to relate to each other better. And
Mm.
for the show, we curated the lobby with Alaska Native art. And, their regalia for the Tlingit are these button blankets that they also wear in ceremony. They said,
Mhm.
Vera's sister said, can I hang my button blanket? I said, yes. If it's like Japanese culture, we don't just hang it in the back. We hang it in a prominent place of respect, right? Does that feel okay to you? She went, yes, that's what we do. So there, right before you go into the actual space, hung the button blanket. And when the Tlingit people came, they're like, wow, they dared to let us hang it there? So they knew this space was for them.
Yeah.
And we keep that practice going now.
Yeah.
And our logo now is Formline. But we engaged a Formline artist to create our Phoenix logo
Mm.
to be a Formline.
That's
So
great.
these are the ways we start to make relationships and honor the culture and ways of life of the people around you and in your own community, especially
Yeah.
That's
Indigenous.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I, I just so appreciate that. I think it's such a deep answer to that question. Both Godfrey and Leslie, what you were saying, and all the different variables that we have to hold, in our communities right now, given our circumstances, but also to always remember it is about the people and how do we come back to that. And it is about the art, Godfrey, not the buildings. it's about the connections we make. And so I just want to say how beautiful it was, and sadly we're out of time. And I wanted to just thank Leslie and Godfrey. Let's give them some love in the chat, and just thank you all for just sharing space with us today and going on with the series launch. It was an idea, and we're going to do it, and it's so exciting to hear from these incredible artists. So a huge thank you, Godfrey, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to be hosting these each month. Stay tuned. And I also want to remind folks out there that NET is currently pay what you can membership. So join us at any level that you are able. It's completely open for folks to join us, and we'll put a link into the chat to the website in case you need that. I think most folks are members, I think. I see on the call. And we also have our social media, so you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Net Ensembles. So you can look us up there if you want to engage with us there. But thank you both. This is a delight.
Thank you. So great
All
to talk to you, Leslie. Thank you so very much for
Thank you.
agreeing to do this. This is awesome.